So is there anything kind of that stuck with you from last time that we need more, a little more time with, or a little more discussion? Any questions that have arisen in the last week? Okay. Well, with that, we are working in, kind of the middle of our study here. We've talked a little bit about Mark's style. We've talked about some of the techniques he uses to tell the story. We're going to look at another thing that he does to kind of set up the way he tells his story, and one of the things that helps make it compelling. Mark is a big fan of prophecy and fulfillment. If we were looking at this strictly from a literary perspective, if we were looking at it only as a work of literature and not a testimony to our faith, we might say he loves to use foreshadowing, and he is very skilled at it. But because this is falls into the category of scripture, I think prophecy and fulfillment is maybe a little more appropriate description. He does this to the point where one theologian, Martin Kaler, described Mark as a passion narrative with an extended introduction. I think Kaler maybe has gone a little too far, but not much. I think as we go through this first part of what we're talking about tonight, we will see that the passion story is so critically important for Mark that he has to start laying the groundwork for it early and often throughout his whole account of Jesus' life and ministry. So let's see if we can go ahead and pick up on some of these ways that he does that. Let's go ahead and open up to Mark chapter 1, verse 1. And Kim, will you help us set the stage? Will you share with us, please, Mark 1:1, and then jump down to verses 12 and 13?
Sure. The proclamation of John the Baptist, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And then the temptation of Jesus. And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him.
So right off the bat, we have this established that he is God's son. He is somebody who is acting on God's behalf. And then we jump down and we find that he is out engaged in struggle with the Satan. So right off the bat, before he does anything, we have already been tipped off that this guy is God's appointed agent, and he is already in conflict with somebody right off the bat. So we have this cosmic level conflict that is now playing out on earth. It has now been, what is the word? It's a word I use all the time. It has now been embodied in Jesus. So this motif of Jesus engaged in conflict, he lets us know real early that we are going to be seeing a lot of this. And as we go through, we're going to see that he lets us see it in some specific ways. And each of these ways is going to reach its kind of its full expression when we get to the passion. So let's go ahead and go to.
I got one question or comment that it's kind of I find it kind of interesting that for the most part, Mark is much more detailed than the other gospels, but for the temptations, it's just like 2 or 3 sentences compared to the 3 temptations in Matthew, and Luke.
Yep. Yeah, and you would think that would be the kind of, and we've seen, like you said, in some other places that Mark likes to make it really vivid and detailed. You would think that would be a conversation Mark would be pretty interested in. But whether he did not have access to that tradition, maybe he had not heard that part of the story, or maybe he knew about it and said, this is not important, because Luke and Matthew have the same temptations, but they put them in a different order. I'm not totally sure if that is significant. We probably talked about it when we studied Luke and Matthew, but it's escaping me at the moment. But yeah, you would think Mark would be a little more interested in this. That is kind of interesting, isn't it? It definitely makes preaching on the first Sunday of Lent a little harder in this year when Mark is our guide. There's a little less to work with, so stay tuned for that. So these themes that he starts kind of pulling the threads into the tapestry here early. Let's kind of identify the first one of those. We're going to be going through and doing a lot of reading tonight. So if everyone has her Bible ready to go, that will simplify things a little bit. Robin, I'm going to ask you to share with us out of chapter 3. I'd like you to share Mark 3:6. Tom, I'd like you to share Mark 11:18. Renee, Mark 12:12. And Nick, if you can share a couple of verses out of Mark 14, 1 and 2, 10, 11, and then jump down to 64. So let's kind of see how these all tie together.
Okay, Mark 3:6. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him and how to destroy him.
Okay. What do we see in chapter 11?
11:18. The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard of this, so they began looking for some way to kill Jesus. They were afraid of him because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching.
Right. And what's the next echo we kind of hear of the same theme in chapter 12, Renee?
Then the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders looked for a way to arrest him because they knew he had spoken the parable against them. But they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away.
So before we get to Nick here, what's the common thread here? What ties all of these together? What's going on?
Fear.
Fear, more specifically, fear on the part of whom?
The
Jesus.
authority.
Chief priests and scribes. Priests and the elders.
Yeah, the authorities, priests, elders. And again, we see this a lot of places in the Gospels, not just in Mark, but the priests and the scribes, these people know their Bible forwards and backwards. They should be the people who are best equipped to see Jesus coming. And yet, they see what Jesus is doing, and they say, no, we're not having this. We got to find a way to get rid of him. If we can kill him, great. And so, again, really early on, chapter 3, we start seeing this. The people in authority want to get rid of Jesus. So we have this thread kind of weaving through, and it reaches its kind of full realization in chapter 14. Nick, will you share those selected verses with us, please?
Yeah. Verse 1, it was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. For they said, not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people. Verse 10, then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. When they heard it, they were greatly pleased and promised to give him money. So he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. 64. You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? All of them condemned him as deserving death. Some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, and to strike him, saying to him, prophesy. The guards also took him over and beat him.
So we have this theme, and the theme develops. People who are in authority, they are hostile to Jesus, and they say, you know what? I think we ought to kill him. And again, they say, we can't have this. You know what? We're going to look for a way to kill him. And they say that a couple more times. And what do they finally do in the Passion account? We have this kind of foreshadowing or this prophecy. People are looking for a way to kill Jesus. And what do they do in the Passion?
They put him to death.
Yeah, they killed Jesus. So yeah, and again, I think this, in my mind, all reflects how important the Passion is for Mark's account of Jesus' life. The Passion is important for all the gospel writers, but I think given how long it is relative to the rest of Mark's gospel, it's particularly important for him. So this idea that there is not just opposition to Jesus, people aren't just kind of, we don't like him. They're actively looking for a way to kill him. And these are the people, again, that should understand his mission the best. And we see that growing and developing, and it reaches its full realization there in the Passion. Questions on this thread that gets us to the Passion?
I have a question on one of the verses in this chapter, not one that I read.
Mm-hmm.
So here's verse 51. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. So I always wonder, what is the point of putting that in?
Yeah. My first thought, looking at it, without trying to bring any other tradition into it, is it seems like the sort of detail that is too bizarre to have been made up. Like if I just wanted to add something random to the story, I don't think people would come up with it. It's the sort of thing, if you're somewhere and they have what seems like a really weird specific rule about something, usually that's in response to a specific thing. So, it may be that this is it may be this is a detail that is just an authentic remembrance of the story. There is some interpretation, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, that it is, he's kind of symbolic of the disciples. They have been, the truth has been torn off of them. They've been exposed for who they are at this point, because verse 50, you see all of them deserted him and fled. So perhaps there's some symbolism there. Probably the most common understanding is that you have this guy who runs off the night Jesus is arrested, and he runs off naked. You have one guy, one young man. So it says there's a young man following him. And I was about to say, if I remember, I don't have to remember. I have my Bible in front of me.
Is it possible that's the author himself?
Pardon?
Is it possible that it was the author himself? Is it possible it was Mark?
See, Pastor, my Bible is the teaching Bible, and this is what it says about that verse. The detail is unique to Mark, and it is thought to be Mark himself.
Oh,
Yeah, that's another tradition. I'm not exactly sure what the kind of why people make that connection. Yeah, it's certainly possible that it is a reference to Mark himself. But they use the same word for a young man for this person and the person who's in the tomb, and tells the two Marys and Salome, Jesus isn't here. So is there some sort of, failure and redemption, that this person is then somehow given the honor of, forgiven and kind of rehabilitated, and given the honor of telling the the women what has happened. So that's another connection that people will sometimes look to. In the spirit of thinking that the simplest explanation often is correct, my guess is it's probably something that happened, and it was part of the story as Mark wrote it down, and he said, this really adds. It's one of those vivid details. You can kind of think of people trying to scurry away from something, and the Romans are trying to grab them and hold them back. No, we want to get all these people, and one guy manages to shimmy away by, somebody's got him by the shirt, and he says, well, I'll just lose my shirt. So I don't have a definitive answer for you, but there's a couple of different answers you can sit with there. Does one of them speak to you more than the others?
I don't know, but they're both okay.
Okay, very good. So Mark has some other ways that he likes to kind of lay the groundwork for the Passion. Let's look at those as well. There's actually 3 little short sections from chapter 2. Lindsay, let me ask you to share those 3 short excerpts from chapter 2. I'll share out of chapter 3. And Kim, if you could read for us, please, Mark 14, 53 through 64.
Okay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there questioning in their hearts, "Why does this fellow speak in this way? It is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And then let's see, verse 16. When the scribes of the Pharisees saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And then let's see, 23, 24. Pronouncement about the Sabbath. One Sabbath he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" All right.
So then in chapter 3, as we heard earlier, the Pharisees immediately went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So before we jump to kind of the fulfillment, what is kind of the expectation that is being created here? We know that the people who are against Jesus, they don't really screw around with, let's see if we can get him to be quiet. They go right to, we're going to look for a way to kill him. And who are these people who are in conflict with Jesus? We have a lot of overlap here among the people who are finding fault with Jesus. Who are they?
The Pharisees, right? The Pharisees?
Right?
Scribes.
We've got scribes. So the scribes they're kind of religious scholars. They are people who are well versed in the law. They would be the type of people if you need a contract drawn up, that sort of thing. You would go to the scribes, and they would do it according to what's in Scripture. So yeah, the Pharisees, the Herodians, the scribes, all of them are saying, no, Jesus is not okay. We cannot let him continue to do this. So it's the people who are in power, the people that the people that everyone else looks to for their interpretation and understanding. They get it wrong about Jesus, and they get it wrong in a major way. Kim, will you share with us exactly how that plays out in the Passion?
Sure. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and elders and the scribes were assembled. Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards, warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many gave false testimony against him, and their testimony did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.'" But even on this point, their testimony did not agree. When the priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But he was silent and did not answer. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus said, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard this blasphemy. What is your decision?" All of them condemned him as deserving death.
So, we have seen up till this point, again, like we said earlier, it's the religious authorities, it's the people with the expertise that really get into conflict with Jesus. And it is those same people in the end, that is the conflict that pushes him to the cross. And like we said, it is bitter irony that the folks who should have been able to read their scriptures and say, yes, this is Jesus, are the ones who are in conflict with him the most. So this theme, again, it starts early and it builds from the beginning. The religious authorities, they are the people who are in conflict with Jesus. Questions, thoughts?
Who were the Herodians? I mean, it sounds like there's a linkage with King Herod. Were they more of the political religious?
That seems to be the case. We don't have a heck of a lot of sources on that. So we do know that so there were people called Augustians. They were kind of people in the patronage network of Emperor Augustus. And we're pretty sure that the name Christians originated as kind of a riff on that, kind of mocking people even. Because the earliest things we see in the New Testament is they refer to themselves as people of the way. But people started calling them Christians. They said, yeah, there's the Augustians. They're the people in the patronage network. They do stuff for the emperor, and the emperor does stuff for them. Here's the Christians. They do stuff for Jesus, and Jesus does stuff for them. So now we have Herodians. So the best guess is that, yeah, they were kind of the political cronies. They were kind of the political hacks that kind of cozied up to Herod and in return got whatever they got, no bid contracts or something. I don't know. But yeah, they were likely, kind of people allied with Herod. Because Herod's position, of course, was kind of tenuous. He served at the pleasure of the emperor. So he needed a support network. So yeah, our guess is, yeah, they were probably tied up with him. And so it's really interesting here. The Pharisees probably were not real big Herod fans. Herod was not, he called himself the king of the Jews. A lot of people would point out he's not ancestry-wise, he's not real Jewish, and certainly in terms of his complete lack of ethics, he is not Jewish. So for the Pharisees, who took those sorts of things seriously, to get together with the Herodians, it's kind of a fascinating confluence. So while we have this kind of lethal opposition to Jesus going on, and while we have this conflict with the religious authorities going on, Mark gives us more to prepare us for the Passion. Let's go ahead and see that. Robin, will you share with us chapter 3, verse 21? Tom, will you share with us chapter 4, 35 through 40? Renee, if you can share with us chapter 6, verse 4. And Nick, if you can share with us chapter 8, 14 through 21.
Okay, chapter 3. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him. for they were saying, he is out of his mind.
It's 35 to 40. On the evening of that same day, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." So they left the crowd. The disciples got into the boat in which Jesus was already sitting, and they took him with them. Other boats were there too. Suddenly a strong wind blew up, and the waves began to spill over into the boat, so that it was about to fill with water. Jesus was in the back of the boat, sleeping with his head on a pillow. The disciples woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we are about to die?" Jesus stood up and commanded the wind, "Be quiet." And he said to the waves, "Be still." The wind died down and there was a great calm. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Why are you frightened? Do you still have no faith?"
Yeah, chapter 8, verse 14.
Oh, hold on. We can't skip Renee.
Oh, sorry.
Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home."
Okay, Nick, now we're ready for you.
Now the disciples had forgotten to bring any bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and yeast of Herod." They said to one another, "It's because we have no bread." And becoming aware of it, Jesus said to them, "Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves and 5,000 for 5,000? How many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect?" They said 12. And the 7, 12, and the 7 for the 4,000. How many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? They said to him, 7. Then he said to them, "Do you not understand?"
So what are we noticing here? What is the trend that Mark is laying out for us that we're going to see kind of reach its fulfillment in the Passion?
Even people very close to him, like his family and disciples, argued with him, or what you would say, were
Had no
against,
faith.
had some kind of problem with him.
Yeah. People closest to him, they argue with him. They fail to understand him. They fail him. The people who are closest to him, again, people who should be the most reliable, turn out not to be. And this continues all the way up to the Passion. And Lindsay, will you share with us, please, out of chapter 14, verse 50, and then if you could jump down to 66 through 72?
Sure. Okay. 50. Okay. All of them deserted him and fled. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, "You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I do not know or understand what you are talking about." And he went out into the forecourt. Then the cock crowed, and the servant girl, on seeing him, began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. Then after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know this man you are talking about." At that moment, the cock crowed for the second time. Then Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept.
we have this phenomenon of the people who are closest to him failing him. They fail to understand him. They fail to continue his mission. And now at this moment, they abandon him. So that failure is kind of complete. All of them flee, they run away. And Peter, who is, the most upfront, I'm going to go with you, Jesus, even if I have to die. He at least follows. He wants to see what happens. And they ask him about Jesus, and he maybe has a moment to say something like, Jesus is a good man, or Jesus is the Messiah, something like that. He denies even knowing him. So that kind of, Mark needs us to be prepared for that kind of epic failure on the part of the disciples. So he lays the groundwork for that. However, the story of the disciples is not simply one of them being like the Keystone Cops of faith. We're going to spend some time with that tonight as well. So, of course, let me stop there and ask questions, comments, insights.
I guess I have a question about why do you think he denies even knowing him? Like, it just doesn't seem, it doesn't seem difficult to be like, yes, he's a good, like they repeatedly ask him like over and over, and yet he's
Right.
still.
I'm guessing fear that he would also be persecuted.
Yeah, I think the immediate reason that would be the easiest to point to is Jesus says so. In chapter 14, verse 29, Peter says, even though all will become deserters, I will not. Jesus said to him, truly, I tell you, this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. So I think prophecy and fulfillment is kind of the immediate cause. I think, Kim, what you said is also very, very true. This idea of, look what they're doing to Jesus. What on earth makes me think that they would not do the same thing to me if, I'm associated with him? So certainly fear is a piece of it, I would think. Because again, as we see from the trial scene, Jesus before the council, they got some people come in and give false testimony, but they couldn't even give that together, and they still decide that's enough to sentence him to death. So we're not talking about justice system that is fair and impartial here in this instance. So Peter probably has pretty good reason to be afraid. So other thoughts, questions? We have one more of these themes we want to see go from development to realization. Of course, we are talking about how all roads lead to the passion in Mark. And so, of course, Mark is also preparing us throughout his account of Jesus' life for Jesus' suffering and death. And rather than going down the columns in our citations here, let's go across instead. Let's kind of go from passion prediction to passion, or passion prophecy to passion fulfillment. So we'll go across. So I'll read out of chapter 8. Kim, I'm going to ask you to pick up chapter 14. Robin, I'll ask you to read out of chapter 9. Tom out of chapter 15. Renee out of chapter 10, and Nick chapter 16. So let me lead by example here and get my text ready. Then he, that is Jesus, began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. So Jesus makes this prophecy. What do we find with its fulfillment? Kim?
The betrayal and arrest of Jesus. Immediately while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. arrest him and lead him away under guard. So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and kissed him. Then they laid hands on him and arrested him.
So he's going to be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes. And the thugs that come out, they're from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Again, not coincidence. Robin, the next time Jesus has something to say about his suffering and death, what does he say?
They went on from there and passed through Galilee. And he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise. But they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him.
Okay, and how do we see that fulfilled, Tom?
The soldiers took Jesus inside to the courtyard of the governor's palace and called together the rest of the company. They put a purple robe on Jesus, made a crown out of thorny branches, and put it on his head. Then they began to salute him. Long live the King of the Jews. They beat him over the head with a stick, spat on him, fell on their knees, and bowed down to him. When they had finished making fun of him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes back on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him.
So again, he says he is going to be betrayed. We saw that with Judas, and he is going to be crucified. And we see that here. He is indeed crucified. Renee, what is the last passion prediction that Jesus makes here? What does he say?
I'm totally lost. What did you tell me?
Chapter 10, verses 32 through 34.
They were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. We're going up to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death, will hand him over to the Gentiles, will mock him, spit on him, flog him, and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise.
So, of course, we can see some overlap here with what Tom just read, these specific things. They will mock him, spit on him, flog him, kill him. And he says he'll be handed over to Gentiles. Of course, it says the Roman soldiers, the Gentiles, were doing all this. So we see some overlap there. But the thing that seems to be lost on the disciples each time he makes this passion prediction is the very last bit. And after 3 days, we'll rise again. That is part of the prophecy. Nick, what do we see in terms of fulfillment of that prophecy in chapter 16?
But he said to them, do not be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He's been raised. He's not here. Look, that is the place they laid him.
So the prophecy is that he will be raised, and here they are in the tomb. You can see where they put him, but he's not there because he is risen. So again, Mark, there, and we'll talk about this a little more next week when we start talking about who is Jesus for Mark. But you can see here that all roads lead to the passion. The cross casts a long shadow in Mark's gospel, and we're seeing some of the things that it casts its shadow on. So everything leads into the passion for Mark. And he's very, very systematic about making sure we understand what's coming our way. Let me stop there. Questions, thoughts, insights?
I have one, I guess, more from just more of a fun fact sort of thing, but in chapter 15, verse 25, I noted it was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him, yet the tradition always has been, and it used to be, I think, even more strongly when I was a kid many decades ago. I mean, most of the Good Friday services went from like noon. Some even went all the way through to 3 because it was always noon to 3 that was thought to be the death of Jesus. So I'm kind of curious about that inconsistency there.
Yes. Look down a little farther. Look at verse 33. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? So I think the worship tradition is probably drawing on that idea of at noon, the time of the day when it should be brightest. Even creation seems to respond to what is going on. Darkness at noon. And between noon and 3 was kind of the peak of the passion, and at 3 o'clock Jesus dies.
Yeah, back in the day, I worked for a bank and they closed from noon to 3. And my mother-in-law used to take the kids, like Mark and his siblings, downstairs in the basement, and they had to be quiet in the dark from noon to 3. A little extreme, but they were Catholic.
I was going to say, depending on how old they were, she might have just been, I'm thinking about some of our prayer concerns that we voiced earlier.
I'm going to start that. I'm totally going to implement that tomorrow. But like, we need to go ahead and have some quiet time from 12 to 3.
Good luck with that, Lindsay.
You gotta wait till
I knew there was a reason I came tonight, right?
you can only do that one day out of the year on Good Friday.
Yeah. They don't need to know that, Tom.
No, they don't know what day it is. It's all right.
If you get 3 hours of quiet, I'm willing to take that once a year.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
but it is interesting, like Kim said, though, the way things have changed, that it was very common for businesses, especially smaller ones like retails and banks and that sort of thing, to just close up from 12 to 3. It was very common back, I would say, even in the 60s.
Well, this was a Dutch-owned bank, so they're very faithful. So that was probably part of it. I don't know that any of the other ones did. I don't remember, but
No, but I'm thinking back further than that, though, where
yeah,
a lot of places it was not uncommon.
probably.
there are still a lot of schools that are off on Good Friday.
Yep.
So not as many businesses, but certainly a lot of schools that are closed. Yeah, it's just an interesting. But yeah, my guess is that the liturgical folks putting worship together are probably saying from noon till 3 was really the peak of it, and that is what when we'll have our observance. That is my guess.
Well, it could have been when they crucified, and that could have been on the march to Calvary and the whole bit, right, where you had to carry the cross, and that could have taken a while.
Well, plus we don't know, the movies that we see, how factual they are. I mean, it shows pretty much as soon as he takes his breath that everything goes dark and stormy, but maybe that isn't exactly how it happened. And maybe by the time they actually crucified him, and then it took from 9 till noon to bring him down from the cross and prepare him and stuff. Maybe, I don't know.
Crucifixion was a slow way to go. That's part of what made it so terrible. So, there are scholars who say, it's actually kind of surprising that it only took from 9 until 3. There were people who were dying for days.
Hopefully God rushed him a little.
Yeah. There's a reason why excruciating comes from the word for a cross. I mean, it's unbelievably barbaric.
Yeah, but you got to remember that on the way to the cross, he was beating himself. He was being beaten, and so I mean, his poor body was already weak, and so those
And that was,
other criminals, they weren't beaten. They were just hung there as healthy as they could be.
that's true. Not to mention the flogging. So yeah.
So the last kind of technique that Mark uses to tell the story, I think is particularly interesting for us as disciples, and it has to do with how he depicts Jesus' first disciples. The conventional wisdom is that the earlier the gospel, the less kind it is to the disciples. So Mark is generally regarded as kind of depicting them as bumbling oafs. The disciples, they can't do anything right. Matthew is a little bit nicer. Luke is quite a bit nicer. And in John, the disciples have some keen insight, and they have some very interesting back and forth with Jesus that helps him teach and what have you. But it is not quite that simple. If we just say, yeah, Mark is mean to the disciples, then we fall into that school of thought that says, Mark is just kind of haphazard and, kind of thrown together, however, which I hope by this point I have disabused you of that notion. Mark is very conscientious of how he puts his account of Jesus' life together. And that is true of how he depicts the disciples as well. So let's go ahead and see what he has to say about the disciples. Lindsay, can you share with us Mark 1, 16 through 20? I'll jump in chapter 2. Kim, if you can share chapter 3, verses 7 through 12. And Robin, if you can share with us chapter 6, 7 through 13.
Okay. Jesus calls the first disciples. As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boat mending the nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him.
Chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. Jesus went out again beside the sea. The whole crowd gathered around him, and he taught them. As he was walking along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him.
Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him. Hearing all that he was doing, they came to him in great numbers from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, beyond the Jordan, and the region around Tyre and Sidon. He told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, so that they could not crush him. For he had cured many, so that all who had diseases pressed upon him to touch him. The whole thing.
Yes.
Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and shouted, "You are the Son of God." But he sternly ordered them not to make him known. He went, oh no, sorry.
Chapter 6. And Jesus called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He charged them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not put on 2 tunics. And he said to them, "Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you depart from there. And if any place will not receive you and will not listen to you, when you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them." And so they went out and proclaimed that the people should repent. And they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them.
So is it as simple as Mark thinks the disciples are a bunch of nitwits. What happens when Jesus calls Peter and Andrew and James and John?
They follow.
They all follow.
They say,
They
okay.
follow. They walk away from their livelihood. They have their own boat. That's probably an indication that they're doing okay. And they walk away from that and follow Jesus. Levi, the tax collector, he probably also was doing okay. It was a government job, but it was just understood. The way you make your living is you have your quota of money you collect. So you collect that plus a little more for yourself. He was doing all right. Jesus said, follow me. He got up and followed him. For whatever other way you want to try to analyze or understand, these guys had a pretty profound sense of trust, of faith in Jesus, that they were willing to walk away from what they knew and follow him. That says something. In chapter 3, these crowds are pressing in on Jesus. His disciples are right there in the thick of it. They are accompanying him through his ministry. They are going and getting the boat ready. They are taking care to make sure that he can do what he has to do. And in chapter 6, what do we see? This, I think, is even more remarkable. What do the disciples do in chapter 6?
They all go out and do what he did to them with them.
Yeah. They're actually sharing, doing his ministry. They are preaching, they are teaching, they are healing. Jesus authorizes them to do the same stuff he does. The disciples are doing what Jesus does. That's pretty awesome to go from come follow me to, hey, look, you're going to be able to do the exact same stuff as Jesus. The disciples are not all bad. So I think that's a word of encouragement. However, the conventional wisdom is the conventional wisdom for a reason. There's another trend that Mark develops with respect to the disciples. Tom, can you share with us out of chapter 4? Renee, can you share with us chapter 7, 17 and 18? Nick, can you share with us 8, 14 through 21? And Lindsay, will you share with us Mark 8, 31 through 33?
When Jesus was alone, some of those who had heard him came to him with the 12 disciples and asked him to explain the parables. You have been given the secret of the kingdom of God, Jesus answered, but the others who are on the outside hear all things by means of parables, so that they may look and look, yet not see. They may listen and listen, yet not understand. For if they did, they would turn to God, and he would forgive them. Then Jesus asked them, don't you understand this parable? How then will you ever understand any parable?
Renee, what do we see in chapter 7?
After he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about this parable. Are you so dull? He asked. Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean.
Right? Nick, what do we find in chapter 8?
This is the same passage I read earlier. Now the disciples had forgotten to bring any bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. They said to one another, it's because we have no bread. And becoming aware of it, Jesus said to them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have ears and fail to see? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for 5,000? How many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? They said to them, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? They said to him, 7. Then he said to them, do you not yet understand?
Okay, and then verse 31, Jesus foretells his death and resurrection. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things.
So, in spite of the fact, or maybe alongside this idea that the disciples are able to kind of get their stuff together and do some ministry, we also see them, so that trend is going up. We're also starting to see a trend that is leading them down and leading them down quickly. What is the common theme here with these instances of what we see about the disciples?
No understanding.
Yeah. At a certain level, they do not understand Jesus. They don't understand what he's saying in his stories. He says to them again, so if you don't get this, what can I possibly do with you? This is, more basic stuff, and you don't understand. They're in the boat, and he's talking about the yeast of the Pharisees, and they say, oh yeah, he's talking about bread, right? Right? And Jesus, you have eyes and you can't see. You have ears, you can't hear. Don't you remember? Are your hearts hardened? Is there something going on with you? Are you like the Pharaoh in Exodus? You just can't get it? And he says, don't you get it yet? So remember, we said Mark depicts Jesus as a little more Mediterranean, a little more expressive. Some of his frustration is coming out right here. And then maybe the most critical, I mean, it's one thing that they don't understand a parable. It's one thing that they don't understand. Jesus is not concerned about having bread. He can feed people, whether he has bread or not. But when he says he must undergo suffering and be rejected and be killed and risen, when he says this is essential to my ministry, and Peter takes him aside and says, Jesus, we can't let you do this. This is not okay. That, I think, is the most crucial misunderstanding, because they fail to understand what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. They may have other ideas of who the Messiah is and what the Messiah does, but for Jesus, his death and resurrection is the most important thing that he does. And they do not understand that. In fact, they try to make him change his understanding of that. So the disciples, they seem to, the more time they spend with Jesus, the less they understand Jesus.
Which I guess is why Mark thinks they're oafs.
Yes. However, well, here we'll get to the apex of oafness. How about that? Again, all things kind of come to their apex in the Passion in chapter 14. I did put page numbers on here. Why do I keep flipping back and forth? Okay. Chapter 14, 32 through 42. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took with him Peter and James and John and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, I'm deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake. And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want. He came and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and he did not know what to say to him. He came a third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up. Let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Kim, will you share with us verse 50? And Robin, will you share with us 66 through 72?
All of them deserted him and fled.
And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You are with the Nazarene Jesus." But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you mean. And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." And again he denied it. And after a little while the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to sweat, "I do not know this man of whom you are speaking." And immediately the rooster crowed and a second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept.
So, in the Passion, the disciples' failure becomes pretty stark and complete. He tells them a simple direction: you need to stay here, stay awake, and watch. And not once, not twice, 3 times he comes back, and they are out cold. They flee. And again, as we said earlier, Peter denies even knowing him. So again, this trend of the disciples, the more they get to know Jesus, I mean, they should really be understanding who Jesus is. He is in the midst of his suffering. He is on his way to die. That is who Jesus is. They should understand this. And no, they decide, nope, this is not for us. We're out of here. So yeah, that negative depiction of the disciples, yeah, it comes from somewhere. It comes from this. But at the same time, it's also the first part of a really important, or I should say, that's the second part of a really important pattern, one that I believe will take us through to the end of the gospel and help us understand this kind of cryptic ending of Mark's gospel. Let's look at the third part of this 3-part pattern. Tom, will you share with us, please, Mark 14 through 20? Renee, if you can share with us, please, Mark 7, 18 through 23. And Nick, will you share with us Mark 14, 26 through 31?
Jesus explains the parable of the sower. The sower sows God's message. Some people are like the seeds that fall along the path. As soon as they hear the message, Satan comes and takes it away. Other people are like the seeds that fall on rocky ground. As soon as they hear the message, they receive it gladly, but it does not sink deep into them, and they don't last long. So when trouble or persecution comes because of the message, they give up at once. Other people are like the seeds sown among the thorn bushes. These are the ones who hear the message, but the worries about this life, the love for riches, and all other kinds of desires crowd in and choke the message, and they don't bear fruit. But other people are like seeds sown in good soil. They hear the message, accept it, and bear fruit. Some 30, some 60, and some 100.
Okay. Renee, what do we find in chapter 7? Or what do we hear in chapter 7?
Did you ask me to read 17 and 18 again?
18 through 23. It's kind of the next thing that happens, yes.
Are you so dull, he asked. Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them, or it doesn't go into their heart, out of the body. Saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. He went on, what comes out of a person is what defiles him, for it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come: sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person.
All the fun stuff. No,
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Nick, what about in chapter 14?
When they had sung the hymn, they went to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, you'll all become deserters, for it's written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I'm raised up, I'll go before you to Galilee. Peter said to him, even though all become deserters, I will not. Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said vehemently, even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all of them said the same.
So in each of these instances, they are, as Renee pointed out, the follow-up to stuff we read earlier about how the disciples are just not getting it. How does Jesus respond when they don't get it? Yeah, he's a little ticked, but
Yeah.
beyond that, what does Jesus do?
He teaches.
He teaches. He doesn't just let them flail. So we have this pattern of, we have divine initiative. Jesus reaches out, begins to teach. We have human failure to understand or receive that teaching. And then Jesus re-engages. Jesus works to kind of overcome that problem or that difficulty. He teaches. They don't get it, so he teaches them the lesson a different way. And we see that happening a couple times. And in what Nick just read, I think is really important, because he says, all of you are going to desert me. You are all going to fail in a really awful way. But I am going to go ahead of you to Galilee, and you will see me there. So even after they abandon him, Jesus says, no, I'm going to find a way even to overcome that. I've invited you to follow me. You are going to stop following me, and then I'm going to meet you again. And remember, Galilee is where he found them. So it's almost like, I'm going to offer you this new beginning. So if we have this pattern of kind of divine initiative, human failure, and divine healing or solving of the problem, let's take that pattern and apply it to the ending of Mark and see if that leads us in any other directions. Lindsay, will you share with us, please, chapter 16, verses 1 through 8?
Okay. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and is it Salome, bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
So this pattern, divine action, human failure in response to it, and God's response of kind of re-engaging and rehabilitating. Is the pattern complete?
Yeah.
Say more.
Well, he affirmed what he said going to happen has happened, and he told the disciple, in this case the women, look, it's happened.
Mm-hmm. So as far as Peter and his people are concerned, the pattern is complete. We saw it play out. We saw Jesus say, "Follow me," and they stopped following him. And now Jesus is sending them the message, I'm going to connect with you again. I'm going to be there with you again, even though this happened. So we have divine initiative, human failure, divine response. We have that complete for Peter and his people. What about for the two Marys and Salome?
They never doubted. They never left him, I would say. Left Jesus in a way.
Right? So that they are with him to the end. They follow him to the cross. They go and they take care of him even after he has died. But when they get there, we have divine instruction. Go and tell them this thing. We have human failure. They said nothing to anyone. What are we missing?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. So if our pattern is kind of divine action, human failure, divine reaction to failure that kind of re-engages or rehabilitates or overcomes that failure, what are we missing here? There's divine action. The messenger says, go and tell people. The women flee from the tomb in terror and amazement, and they say nothing to anyone. We have human failure. What's missing if we want to complete the pattern?
They were afraid.
Divine.
That
Here.
teaching moment, like at the end, we're missing the intervention at the end.
Intervention, divine intervention.
Yes, we're missing God's response that corrects the human failure. What do we think is going on with that? Why might Mark have left that pattern incomplete at this point? I mean, certainly he knows they said something to someone. If they hadn't have said anything, Mark would not have written this book. So it's not that he doesn't know something happened afterwards. He's doing this on purpose. Why might that be the case?
We have to wait for the Holy Spirit at Pentecost.
Yeah.
I was just going to say the sequel, but that's kind of it.
Yeah. We need to expect that God will complete this. God will overcome this. There will be that intervention that sets things the way God needs them to be. And I think if we start at chapter 1, verse 1, this is the beginning of the good news. There is no ending to the good news because it plays out in our lives. Remember, his whole purpose is read this compelling account of Jesus' life. It's going to make you want to be a
like
part
Jesus.
of the story. Yeah. So I think Mark is leaving it open-ended because that divine response to human failure is constant. It happens again and again in the book. So we can actually draw comfort and strength from this idea that God's response to our failure is still ongoing. And I think that's a word of encouragement to us. And I think it is a word to us to say that pattern keeps going. God is going to continue to reach out. We're going to continue to respond. And sometimes we will fail. But even if we do, God is going to make that failure okay. So I think he's leaving it open to leave room for us.
So the people who translated the Bible later on added the rest of the verses of chapter 16.
Yes, that is kind of the most commonly accepted theory, that people found this ending to be very unsatisfying. Kind of like when The Sopranos ended a few years ago, a lot of people were really unhappy with that. It's kind of the same thing. It just kind of stops. What do we do with that? Well, they maybe took some stuff from other gospels, they maybe took some stuff from other traditions, and they said, let's at least kind of tie it up. They did all they had been commanded and talked to Peter. Jesus sent them from east to west and did that. Jesus appears to 2 disciples. Jesus commissions the disciples. Jesus ascends. So it's almost like they've taken the other gospels and kind of condensed the resurrection accounts and stuck them on here. But the best manuscript evidence and the literary evidence is that verse 8 was the original ending, which in my mind kind of puts another point in the case that Mark knew exactly what he was doing.
Interesting.
Which are words that I know Kim uses often.
Interesting.
No, Mark knows exactly what he's doing.
Oh, yeah, no. He'll even tell you that.
So, other questions, thoughts, insights before we conclude for the evening?
Oh, real quick. Robin, did you say you had to take Tylenol before your injection?
That was suggested 2 hours before the injection.
The Tylenol, okay.
Yes.
So, hold on, my battery's about to die here. I don't want to go this far and then lose you in the last 30 seconds. So yeah, we will gather again next week. I will send out a new handout. That'll be our final handout, our final series of sessions with Mark. So we will pick up again next week. So thank you everyone for giving of your time and your insight. And why don't we conclude our time tonight by praying the Lord's Prayer together.
Okay, thank you.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor.
You are very welcome.
Thank you. Feel better. Feel better. Feel better, Renee.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
Take care.